Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. Welcome to CoMotion. This is yet another venue for us, and this is courtesy of Aaron Bodmer. Aaron, raise your hand. Aaron is one of our residents here, so we want to thank him for helping to manage this and make this happen. And let me know if you feel this was easy to get to or hard to get to, or we're still getting our feet wet on this. And so it's always great to get feedback. So I won't say anything, but this is easier. This is easier for me personally, but I won't go any further than that. Well, so I want to first thank our sponsors, Oracle, for making this happen. A little bit about Oracle. Oracle Corporation is an American multinational computer technology corporation headquartered in Redwood Shores, California. I think we all knew that. Company specializes primarily in developing and marketing database software and technology, cloud engineering systems, and enterprise software products, and particularly its own brand of database management systems. And of course, they do blockchain development, so we'll be hearing from Mark shortly about that. I want to also say special thanks to Pranitha Gadapati for helping to make this happen. She is one of their managers that basically put us in touch with Mark, and she helped coordinate this from, I think, is she on the East Coast?
I'm not sure where she is. Some of the team is actually in Redwood Shores area.
Oh, okay. I'm
not sure where she is based herself.
Okay, so Pranitha did a great job, and so we are here with Mark, and Mark is with us because of her, so we wanted to thank her for that. And also, like I said, thanks to Aaron for making this happen through UW CoMotion. I think I sent the URL out to people that are interested in getting involved in the organization here. If you want to learn more, talk to Aaron. So if you have a startup and you're looking for a home, just don't look any further than these little windows over here, and you can kind of see the tech churn over here. Okay, so something else that is really a nice thing from Oracle is if you haven't signed up yet, there's a sign-up sheet. Oh, I think it's over by my computer here. So it's a $500 credit for using Oracle's cloud platform services. So $500 is great. I believe it's a 30-day trial. 30 days, nice, yeah. So you could make use of this in very short order, and it's a pretty nice deal. I'm sure Mark could tell you the details about it. If you're interested, either contact me or there's a sign-up sheet that you can fill it out. Just email me if you're interested, because I'll have to transpose the stuff on that sheet. But we have some folks already signed up on it. If you're interested, $500. That's impressive. So that's really great. And again, thanks to Pranitha and Mark for making that happen. Oh, okay, good. So Mark will have some additional info. Okay. Oh, and we have a raffle. So this is the first time we've done a raffle. So if you've noticed, the astute of us would see, oh, look, we have little numbers on and if you've got a buddy system, you can look at your buddy if you can't see it. So we're going to raffle off 2 items, and this was in the email. We've got a sports bottle and a T-shirt. So I have, of course we have apps for this. So I have an app that is somewhere on here, and we're gonna run this app if I can find it. Oh, here we go. So get ready, and here comes the first one. 56. Does anyone have? Oh, all right, Pat. All right. So you want the T-shirt or the water bottle? This is insulated, so it's all right. Sweet.
Thank you.
All right, and here comes the next one for the T-shirt. 14. Does anyone have 14? Nobody has 14. You better look hard. Make sure it's not me. 38. Okay. I'm going blind. Okay, we're doing this again. 51. Nobody's got 51? All right. 30. All right. Hey, our newcomer is getting a Hyperledger T-shirt. Oh, here's why you want to go the Hyperledger stack. Free stuff. Okay. All right, well, that was cool. All right. You're welcome. And there's no liquor in there right now. Don't test it for that. Okay, so some community announcements. We've got for our next on-site meetings, we're in talks with T-Mobile. Chris Spanton is here, as a matter of fact. He and I are going to get together later this week, and we're trying to persuade him to come and talk with this group. We're also in talks with IBM, and I believe TrueBase, and I'm not seeing our TrueBase contact here, Seth. So we're looking at maybe getting TrueBase involved. And also coming up next month, sort of in line with the Blockchain Seattle conference, September 10th or 11th, we may be working with Education Ecosystems. They're a London-based organization. They contacted us. They want to come talk to Hyperledger folks. We're going to try to see if we can make that happen. We have some issues with schedules, so we're debating that. I'd also like to sort of float this idea out. We've been doing these features with a guest speaker. I want to see if you would be interested in just having sort of an open space event where it's just membership, and we get together and we talk on topics that are in some way Hyperledger related. Does that sound interesting, or you want to continue to bring in guest speakers? So we may mix it up. So I'm getting kind of lukewarm reaction to that. Okay. And then the other thing, and I think Aaron, might have been looped into this, I'm thinking about maybe doing practice pitches. And so the notion of a practice pitch is if you happen to be a startup or know a startup that's interested, and it's in some way blockchain Hyperledger related, this might be kind of a neat opportunity for you to sort of do a pitch, maybe a 5-minute or 3-minute pitch to talk about your startup. And it would be a practice because obviously we're not here generating revenue. But it would be an opportunity for you to maybe sell something about your startup so that if you're doing this in the real world in front of VCs and funding, this is a good opportunity for you to maybe get involved. And really the way that this worked out was, I think Aaron and I were here a couple weeks ago talking, and it was like, hey, we've got all these very cool startups. In fact, Aaron's got a startup himself they're using Hyperledger. And I want to know more about what Aaron's doing. I said, Aaron, why don't you just pitch for 5 minutes and tell the audience what you guys do. So would that be interesting? Who's here? Who has a startup here? Oh, okay, we've got some folks. All right, good. So that might be happening. I may send out a questionnaire and sort of we can dial in on that a little bit to get a better sense for where the sweet spot might be. I care more about people that would be interested in participating. Because if we don't have people that participate, then we're just going to sit around and look at each other. Okay. Blockchain Seattle 2018 is coming up. That's the blockchainseattle.io site. We have currently a 10% discount, but I sent something out, I think this morning. Marissa, you said yay to that. I think it's a 20% discount. So go up to the site, look into the discussion column. I think you get a little email blurb that says Rich put something up. 20% off for this event. That's pretty good. Yeah, there are a bunch of tiers to this. So the event itself is pretty pricey, especially if it's not early bird anymore. So as Marissa points out, there are a couple of tiers to it. So 20% off of whatever you might be interested in might be pretty worthwhile. Anyway, blockchainseattle.io for that. And we do have one of our members, our co-organizer, Tony Little, will be speaking on the topic of healthcare. And Chris, hey, Chris will be, so look, it's a community. Okay, and then Justin Wu is running Blockchain Northwest Summit. For those of us that might be familiar, Blockchain Northwest happened earlier this year. I think it was official sort of first blockchain event here in the Pacific Northwest. He's doing a summit. Was originally slated for September 15. It's been moved to October 15. I just got an email from him, and he said great things. He's going to get us a discount code is the short answer. We don't have it yet. I think I might be speaking at that event. I'm debating on that, but I might moderate the healthcare component of this. Anyway, so that's blockchainnorthwest.com, and like I said, we'll probably be getting a promo code soon. It may be in my email, but I didn't have a chance to read it. Okay, so we're ready to have Mark come and do his magic, and he came up from San Francisco just for this. Mark Rakhmilevich, did I? And my wife is partly Russian, and so I better get it right. On enterprise adoption of Hyperledger Fabric. Mark has worked with enterprises on distributed systems and transaction processing in banks, payments, telcos, insurance, and government for over 20 years. He is Senior Director of Blockchain Product Management and works on the Blockchain Cloud Service with Oracle's PaaS development to address the needs of enterprise customers and SI and ISV partners with scalable, secure, and managed cloud platform for development of enterprise-oriented blockchain networks. He's guided customers and partners around the world, applying blockchain technology to a broad range of business challenges, supporting discovery and sharing best practices, deployment models, and integration architecture to facilitate rapid experimentation and production-ready results. With a master's degree in computer science, Mark delivers customer workshops, seminars, writes on blockchain topics, frequently speaks at industry conferences on enterprise blockchain, including Oracle Open World Developer 2018, Blockchain Expo, Tulip 2018. I don't know if Tulip. Where is Tulip? Who knows Tulip? San Francisco, of course. Why not? How come not here in Seattle? We'll change that.
No, you organize next one.
All right. Tulip. I don't understand Tulip. Okay. It'll have to be evergreen or, yeah. Yeah. Modern supply chain experience, Oracle Code, of course, and more. And, of course, hosts Hyperledger's Silicon Valley meetups. So thank you, Mark, and welcome. I'm going to hand this over to you. And I'm going to ask you to pin that to yourself. And this will just slip out. Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's see if that works. All right, that's good. All right. Thanks, Richard, and thanks for inviting me up here. Happy to be in Seattle. I was actually here about 3 months ago. My daughter is just starting college, and we were exploring some of the up here in UW and Seattle College and so on. She ended up picking something else, unfortunately, but close enough in Portland. So happy to be back here again. As Rich mentioned, work on the Oracle blockchain platform, on the Oracle blockchain platform strategy with a lot of customers. Joined Oracle, it's probably been about 10 years ago as part of acquisition. Came over from BEA Systems. Oracle acquired BEA Systems, which was a big middleware company. You might have heard of systems like Tuxedo, WebLogic, Aqualogic, and so on in basically distributed transaction processing. Tuxedo was pre-Java, WebLogic was Java-oriented, J2E, of course, and then other things, BPM and other stuff on top of that. But our background, mine and my team pretty much, is all around distributed transaction processing on massive scale, typically inside an enterprise. I mean, blockchain is all new, of course, to all of us because we're trying to do the same things we've been doing for years inside an enterprise now across an enterprise ecosystem, which is fun. But just to add to something Richard mentioned when he was talking about Oracle, as a database company, for the last 10 years, we've been trying to change that and make sure that people understand that Oracle is not only a database company. Of course, database is still big, but Oracle's got a bunch of middleware solutions, a bunch of application systems, ERPs, supply chain management, HR, you name it. In fact, probably the biggest now applications company on the par with SAP in that space. And of course, we acquired Sun some years ago, and so we have a hardware systems division as well, component now, and building some appliances and some really cool engineered systems together, hardware, software stuff together. But forget all of that because none of that is true anymore. Oracle is now completely different. Oracle is now all about cloud. So all of the stuff we've been doing with software, licenses on-premise and all of that, we are transitioning rapidly as we can, as our customers can keep up with us, into a cloud environment. So Oracle basically is providing cloud across infrastructure layer, platform as a service layer, application layer, SaaS, and now something called data as a service. So, a lot of data that's used in marketing and sales and, decision making of all sorts and so on. So there's this four levels to Oracle Cloud. And all of the rest of the technologies that we've built over the years, of course, is being used and being reinvented for cloud purposes. Blockchain is a little bit different because it was actually something that from day one was a cloud-only solution. We are not providing blockchain on premises, so we have a private cloud for customers who want to deploy in their data center, but it still feels and looks and works like a cloud solution. So we're still basically doing a cloud version of blockchain, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll tell you what our customers have been doing. We have been in this process for the last about 2.5 years. Doing exploration, trying to understand the enterprise need for blockchain, where it had a good fit, and then ultimately decided we wanted to build a platform. Looked around the different technologies, picked Hyperledger Fabric. I'll tell you a little bit about why that decision was made. Went into early release last year with a number of customers and then formal beta program. And just about a month and a half ago in July, announced general availability of Oracle Blockchain Cloud Service as a generally available platform. And so that's a little bit of history. Let's get started actually. And of course there is a safe harbor statement. Don't buy anything based on anything I say, because I'm not in sales. I just build the stuff. So everybody's of course been seeing blockchain all over, all around you in the news and all around the landscape for the last couple years, because people are really excited about it. And people, of course, mostly excited about Bitcoin, and just a few months ago it was over 10,000, and now it's down like I think around 5 or something. I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's mostly when I talk to people about blockchain, I have to spend 5 to 10 minutes explaining Bitcoin's here, blockchain's here. Related, but two separate things, right? I don't need to explain that to you. I'm sure you all guys understand the difference here, right? So, but is it better? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Hopefully I won't stumble over any wires here. There are some interesting numbers from Gartner about the potential of business adoption of blockchain and what it means. The number I get excited about is this one, 2,500 patents in the report from World Bank showing, specifically around blockchain technology, showing a great deal of innovation, a lot of evolution happening. Legist all agrees that blockchain is not there yet completely. It's not perfect. It's not mature. A lot more needs to be done to get it there. Hopefully the work we're doing and everybody else in the space is going to help. But in fact, this number, if anything, I think is accelerating. We're beginning to see even faster evolution of the technology in a number of areas, driven by the fact that people are actually doing things with it, right? I mean, it's no longer a concept. It's no longer something that I just want to understand. Something I want to use and get value from if you're talking to an enterprise or business customer. And now they're finding, well, it's great, but I have some gaps here or have some limitations here. So technology is coming along and trying to solve those problems, and of course it's pushing for new use cases as a result, and those new use cases drive kind of a virtuous adoption circle, because we're beginning to see more innovation happening as the use cases need new capabilities. So a lot of exciting stuff there. Now, there's a real money to be made in blockchain, right? I mean, this is just kind of thing to play with. All of us, have hobbies and all of that, I'm sure. But, can this be real? Well, IDC, which is pretty good with numbers, if you look at different analysts, IDC tends to be the most believable when it comes to actual numbers. He had a report recently, and they tallied it up. 945 million spent in 2017, 2.1 billion this year is their projection, and about 10 billion by 2021. This is a lot of spend, right, from companies. Now, some of it's going to be, in application development and system integrators. Some of it's going to be software and cloud services, infrastructure. But there is enough here to go around, I think. What's also interesting is this numbers. 22% of CIOs are either exploring blockchains or have plans to do so in their environments. And this is really exciting, because ultimately, with enterprises, putting their toe in the water, we're not going to see real adoption. Now, what are they doing? I'll tell you that from Oracle, from our experience over the last 2 or 3 years, talking to our customer base, which is hundreds of thousands of customers, small and large, we see 4 main buckets, right? So financial services, of course. I mean, that's where it started. That's where it's continuing to grow. And we see things around payments, intrabank, cross-border, interbank, funds transfer, B2B payments, trade finance-related things around invoice factoring, supply vendor finance, customer onboarding and KYC, know your customer requirements for maintaining valid information that comes from multiple sources around the bank's customers, loyalty points and loyalty networks, and many other cases. But where we really see a huge ramp up that's probably going to accelerate and overtake financial services is going to be in supply chain. I'm firmly convinced that this list is going to grow at much faster rate, and primarily for two reasons. One is you don't have nearly as much regulatory overhead and compliance issues that people worry about as they do in financial services, right? I mean, banks have to look carefully every step they take to make sure they don't, run afoul of some kind of regulation. And the other thing with supply chain, you have natural ecosystems, right? Blockchain, somebody said it a while back, is a team sport. You need to have multiple parties to see the value successfully from blockchain. And in a supply chain environment, you have a lot of parties participating in. So we see a lot of these areas, and I'll show you some specific examples. But things like tracing parts and particularly authenticity of parts. Turns out there is a lot of fraud in, for example, electronics, right? When you send something in to be repaired or manufactured, you don't know what you're going to get back. Is it going to have authentic parts or not? Same thing with, big ticket items. There is, food-related blockchain use cases all over the place, of course. You've seen IBM's commercials, tomatoes dancing and all that stuff. They're really good at marketing. Traceability around things, the country of origin is a use of, prohibited minerals, conflict minerals, and other things. A lot of IoT integration, we'll talk about that as well. What's also been surprising is the level of interest and adoption in the public spaces, federal government, state, local. There is typical use cases where they want to put records on the blockchain to make it easier to access, make sure they're certified and all of that stuff. But then we also see things like citizen services. There's a couple projects in India, for example, where at the provincial level, they're trying to run some projects to provide essentially citizens benefits in an electronic wallet, right, so tokens. Digital identity and identity proofing is really big in government. We'll talk about that. Customs, of course, because it's part of kind of trading ecosystem. And the last bucket is healthcare, which is also interesting because not something you typically think of as, being on the forefront of adopting new technology. But when it comes to blockchains, they are. We see all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of companies trying to figure out how to do electronic health record sharing. So when you go from one provider to another, they actually have access to your data, and more importantly, you can control the fact that they get access and when they have it and when they shouldn't have it. So it's a time-based kind of thing. Insurance revenue cycles, clinical data collection, drugs, pharmaceuticals. I think within 5 years, every single drug company is going to track everything on the blockchain and they'll be out of business. The regulations are coming fast and furious across US, China, India, Europe, etc. in this area. So blockchain is going to be the only way to do business pretty much for track and trace in pharmaceuticals. And also integration with IoT devices. If you think about the heavy level of technology used in hospitals, right? Dialysis machines and MRI machines and hundreds of other pieces of equipment. Guess what? They have failures. They get recalled. There is maintenance that needs to happen, usually by some subcontract person coming in. Parts needs to be replaced. And tracking all of that in a healthcare setting is highly regulated by FDA. Right? So like FAA sends notices when there's something wrong with planes. FDA sends notices when there's something wrong discovered with a particular model of various machines. And they have to take actions, they have to track, they have to comply and all of that stuff. So asset management, asset tracking, but in the healthcare setting in particular is big. So this is just to whet your appetite a little. What we try to do is essentially put together some models that we think, and I'll just build it out so I can talk about it, so that we can take all of the different use cases across different industries and bring them into something more digestible, right? I mean, some design patterns that are fairly. And we see 4 main ones. The first one is around autonomous marketplaces. Of course, well, that's cryptocurrencies are basically a marketplace where you trade things of value, right? Tokens and such points. But you could be trading other things. You could be doing invoice factoring, right? Selling invoices or selling other valuable instruments, valuable paper. You could be trading physical goods and then tracking the provenance of those goods. If you are in the market for expensive luxury cars, you probably want to know exactly if you're buying that $400,000 Ferrari, what has been done to it, when, by whom, the parts have been installed, have been genuine, certified technicians worked on it, and all of those things, right? So, and there's many other examples of that. The second area is business transactions, B2B transactions, that require a lot of reconciliation today. I mean, a simple example, right? You have a purchase order from a company, and there is a set of line items in the purchase order, and so, that goes to some supplier, and they sell those components or whatever it happens to be, and they issue an invoice, and there is a bunch of line items in an invoice, and they have to be able to cross-match those, and they do that today, but they do it very ineffectively. And they also have to get some information from shipping company to know that it's been delivered or accepted, or maybe the customer who's purchasing has actually run some acceptance tests or whatever and accepted the items. And so you have 3 different sources of information that need to come together to be able to say, okay, this is a piece of business that's been completed, and we can issue payments and all of that stuff. It's been purchased, it's been invoiced, it's been delivered, accepted, etc. So it's a great example of using blockchain to accelerate that kind of settlement process, create single source of truth from multiple silos of the information, and then run some smart contracts to actually automate the whole settlement process, trigger payments and whatnot. And there's many other examples, in the business world. Decentralized records, whether it's electronic health records or government records or maintenance notices or other kind of things. The popular example, there is less logic, less smart contracts work. This is more around sharing data, but still very valid type design pattern. And then track and trace, where you're actually keeping track of a particular object, whether physical or digital, and you're associating a whole bunch of transactions coming from a variety of systems, sometimes back office systems, sometimes IoT devices that report the data and all kinds of other things, and associating kind of the journey of a particular product, a particular component, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals or anything else. Right. So those kind of design patterns that we've seen that we believe most use cases fall into. So I mentioned earlier that when we started looking at all of this, and we looked at the breadth of requirements that our customers have across different industries, we decided that we wanted to pick as a starting point Hyperledger Fabric from Linux Foundation. How many people are new to Hyperledger? A few. Okay, so probably should spend a little bit of time just to give you an insight into what it is. So you all know Linux Foundation, right? I mean, this is basically the organization that came together to shepherd the evolution of Linux over the last couple decades. And it did pretty good, right? So in terms of governance models and practices and membership and all of that. So Hyperledger is formed as a project under Linux Foundation following the same models and practices. There is a number of sub-projects. There is a number of infrastructure components. One of the main ones is Hyperledger Fabric. That's a technology stack essentially providing blockchain. There is 2 or 3 others. Sawtooth and a couple others there, but Roja, etc. But the main one is Hyperledger Fabric. There was a lot of work done by a couple companies early on who contributed the initial source base, Digital Assets, IBM, and a couple others. And now there is probably over 200 companies in the Hyperledger community. They just had the recent announcement. I think another 13 or 14 joined last week. And so, you have members like IBM and Oracle and SAP and, all kinds of big tech companies. And then you have organizations which are a lot of system integrators as there. A lot of smaller companies and, startups and so on that have been participating as well. So there is very broad, diverse membership there. But everybody is working pretty well together to drive the adoption of the technology and the evolution of that. So we picked it because we felt it was the most suitable for a broad set of use cases. We weren't looking to build a very specialized vertical application. We needed a horizontal platform that could apply to a number of those use cases across many industries. So it's a permissioned blockchain to begin with, right? So unlike public blockchains, Bitcoins and Ethereums out there, you cannot have an anonymous member. You need to be a legal entity with recognized identity to be able to join. And when you join, you get essentially registered as a member organization, and you have a certificate, X509 certificate issued. And so all of the transactions that you participate in then are signed using the digital signatures based on the private key associated with that certificate. There is all kinds of background processes that could take place in terms of accepting new members, adopting. That's up to the implementation, of course, but the basic mechanics are there. Of course, it's programmable, right? You can run smart contracts. There is a notion of what's called chain code at the system level, which implements Fabric itself, written primarily in Go, and then there is application level chain code, which is how smart contracts get written and deployed. It's very scalable. Some of the more recent performance numbers that have come out are in the order of around, I think, 3,000, 3,500 transactions per second in some particular use cases, and it can scale a lot more than that. And the reason it's scalable is because it separates some of the compute-intensive tasks across multiple environments, multiple containers. The execution of smart contracts is done in something called a peer node. The ordering of the transactions into blocks is done by something called an orderer or orderer service. There is a cluster of those. And they're separate systems, and they can scale up individually, right? There's a bunch of other things, and I'll talk a little bit about performance and what we've done in that area. But you also can partition the number of smart contracts or chain codes that you have across multiple what's called channels, separate domains, subledgers, if you will, or subnets. And that gives you another way of parallelizing the whole execution process and gives you even more performance. There is a notion of confidentiality and privacy. There is a capability to create subnets with private ledgers and groups of members authorized to that particular channel. And then all transactions associated with a particular channel name in the request go into that particular ledger, and only members that are authorized to be on the channel are allowed to access it and execute those transactions and all of that stuff. So that's one level. There is a number of other capabilities around confidentiality. There is something for recent in Fabric 1.1 for attribute-based access control. So you could actually, in the chain code itself, in the business access control management, based on the attributes, extract the certificate itself. And there is private transaction support coming in Fabric 1.2 in the form of site database, where you can basically, as a client sending a transaction request, can specify that only certain participants are allowed to see certain fields. And then they will keep that in a separate, it's called site database. The hash of the data will be included in the ledger. So you still have proof of the actual transaction taking place. And that's stored in the ledger, but only authorized participants will be able to see the individual fields. So, and also it's very modular. And that's one of the things from Oracle perspective. As a software company, want to build things and add value that really attracted us. So we could innovate and maintain full compatibility at the API level, at the protocol level, but at the same time add a lot of value underneath. And it's built to do that, to allow you to do that. Basic sort of architecture of Hyperledger Fabric blockchain is that you have, I mentioned peers and orderers, right? This is the two main components that typically run in Docker containers, right? So peers are responsible for running smart contract and generating an endorsement, which is basically a signed result set from that execution. It also maintains a ledger and the current world state. Order is responsible for taking all transactions that come from different clients, batching them, creating blocks, sending them to the peer. The peer then runs a committer function, which goes through the validation process to ensure the transaction still remains valid. And then if it's valid, it gets appended, the world state gets updated, the key value sets, and the block itself gets appended to the ledger. Actually, the block gets appended to the ledger regardless, but there is a bitmap indicating which transactions are valid and which ones are not in the block. You have a membership component, something called MSP, Membership Service Provider, which is responsible for registering new members and issuing enrollment certificates. And that's used essentially to manage membership. And then you have a client SDK, which allows applications to actually interact with the system. It allows you to invoke APIs for the membership service provider to register a new member, to submit transactions called a proposal. And then typically what you do is you submit a proposal, you specify the number of endorsers required by policy, so how many digital signatures you need in a particular execution of a smart contract. The peer will run it in a separate chain code execution container. Multiple peers will run it from multiple organizations if required by endorsement policy. All of the results digitally signed come back to the application, and the SDK manages the process of checking, ensuring there is a match, that they all agree, and then backing them up, sending them to the orderer and saying, here's the transaction, here's the result, and here's all of the digital signatures attesting to that fact. The orderer verifies the signatures are valid based on this information, batches those transactions based on some parameters around this block size, how many transactions per block, and so on. It's very configurable. Sends the blocks all to back all the peers on a particular channel, and then the peers go through the commit process and then send notification back to the client transaction has been committed, or not, as the case may be. So this is kind of a very, quick 5-minute introduction into Hyperledger Fabric architecture. So it'll help you a little bit to understand some of those things I'll be talking about after this. And this is what it looks like graphically, and I'll build this thing out. So you have a number of peer nodes that actually do smart contract execution and maintain the ledgers. You have ordering service, which is available basically today in a cluster model using Kafka as a way to achieve consensus on the ordering or serialization sequencing of the transactions. You have membership service, which is responsible for registering members. And then you have applications that do, using SDK, for example, interact with the system. Of course, to make this work, you have to bring a whole bunch of additional components. And one of the things we've done in our cloud service is package all of this, including all of this stuff underneath, into a single template that you can provision in a matter of minutes. Normally, if you start from scratch, it takes a bit of work to get all of this working together and build all of the stack. And then, of course, you have to maintain it and upgrade it and, on and on. So, but that's kind of the basic architecture of a Fabric network. So what we've done in Oracle essentially is use a whole bunch of our cloud services at infrastructure and task level, identity management, event management, containers, Kafka, etc., and then integrated that with a Hyperledger architecture that's enhanced with additional reliability and some performance gains, and I'll talk about some of the value we put inside. But mostly what we've done is try to integrate it with a variety of service endpoints to ensure that it has all the underlying capabilities. We've added on top a REST proxy. If any of you played with Hyperledger Fabric in 0.6 version days, there was a REST API, and then by 1.0 release it disappeared, right? So we thought it was important to add it back in. Makes it very easy to integrate with all kinds of applications. And we added administration console with a whole bunch of management and operations tools. So instead of executing very complex and long and command lines which subject to a lot of typos obviously and issues, we provide a nice UI to make it all work together, and dashboards and all kinds of things. And you can run it in Oracle Cloud data centers, and we'll soon have something we call a cloud machine, which is basically an appliance form factor that runs the cloud software that's deployed into Oracle, into customers' data center, and they can all interact. Yes?
So, can it be hybrid or only on Oracle Cloud?
So our service itself requires underneath Oracle Cloud infrastructure services, but it can interoperate with non-Oracle instances of Hyperledger Fabric, so it can go hybrid. And in fact, we have customers who are doing that right now in some pilots. So you could take a standard open source Fabric on your machine, or put it on Amazon, or go to IBM Bluemix if you want, and connect it to one of our instances, and there is interoperation and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Is the data services what you have on the side only?
No, in this case, this is referring to object store. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things we've done is to ensure that all of the configuration changes and new blocks as they get added are archived automatically into the object store for two reasons. One is that if you fail and you need to recover the peer node, there is a capability. People say, well, in a distributed network, you can recover from other peers. Yes, but has anybody tried to recover a blockchain that has a few million blocks and been running for a couple of years? I don't think so. Not pretty. It takes days and days and days. You can get the stuff from object store much faster. That's one. Second thing is our object store is replicated across multiple data centers. So you have built-in disaster recovery. You could just come up, bring up an instance in another data center, what we call availability domain in the region, and the data is already available, and it just picks up all the configuration and everything else in the blocks. But we'll be adding additional things. I have a slide that talks a little bit about some of the roadmap-ish items. All right, so this is just a quick intro. I'll go into a little bit more details later on, but just wanted to shift gears a little bit, talk about kind of the business value and then the customer use cases and what they're doing. One of the things that customers always need help with when we talk to them at least is how to justify an ROI, how to sell this up and get the budgets approved and get the projects approved and so on. So we've put together a model that kind of focuses on that and helps them translate the basic properties of the blockchain, particularly Hyperledger Fabric blockchain capabilities, into the benefits that can then drive ROI conversation with whoever in the approval chain gets involved, right? So it's a decentralized network that helps you to achieve near real-time settlement, remove intermediaries, for example, if you have cost issues with them. The distributed ledger provides single source of truth, so you have visibility immediately within your trading ecosystem. The immutability of the transactions can increase data, confidence in the data, reduce opportunities for fraud, and there is quite a bit of fraud that happens across enterprise boundaries. Smart contracts can help you automate things and protect from human errors in those processes which today are largely manual. I was, just a little side note, I was really amazed over the last couple of years talking to customers how much work gets done in the companies by extracting data from their systems of record, ERP systems and the others, into Excel spreadsheets, sending those around to whoever they need to work with in other companies and getting that back and forth, and then ultimately updating the ERP system back. The reason they don't do it directly in the ERP because different ERP systems don't talk together all that well. It takes a lot of work to integrate them and make it seamless, so they just do spreadsheet-based integration essentially. So people ask me, where's a good use for use case? I just said, go to your mail server and check for any external mail outgoings that's got an Excel spreadsheet attached. I'll bet you'll find some good ones. No, seriously, I mean, all kinds of invoice reconciliation, all kinds of, mortgage securitization, right? How mortgages, you get a mortgage, right? Your bank is going to sell it to somebody to get it securitized. They're going to take a bunch of mortgages, a bunch of loans, put them in a spreadsheet, they run some macros to create some valuation models, and send it off to some company who's going to buy that. And those people are going to monkey around and say, now, we think that's too high, this is too low, etc. We don't want this loan, we want that loan, send the spreadsheet back. And it goes back and forth, right? Potential for human errors, fraud, lack of auditing, right? I mean, all kinds of issues that can come up in that environment. So, transparency, of course, simplifying audits, improving governance and those kind of things. So we kind of try to help people understand what the real value proposition is from a business perspective and how to sell it ultimately, how to sell it up. I really like this quote, recent one from Inc. magazine, talking about the value, particularly in a supply chain environment, and how people who are adopting this will be able to see the benefits and the value propositions is going to be as great or comparable to the change from handwritten paperwork to electronic databases. Let's hope. So let's talk about some examples here. When we announced in July, we had a few customer examples we could name publicly. Obviously, we have confidentiality rules with customers who engage in various projects. But at some point, we asked them, we can talk publicly. And there were a few that we mentioned publicly in the announcements. And there have been some articles. If you Google Oracle and blockchain, you'll find a few of those. In logistics space, CargoSmart, which is a maritime shipping company, doing a lot of work in documentation tracking, shipping documentation tracking with carriers, ocean freighters, and all of that stuff. Solar Side Design is basically a company that helps to build and implement solar projects, and there is a lot of subcontracting involved in different people that they need to track. Korean e-commerce company called M2O that's creating multi-brand loyalty network. On the financial side, corporate finance, Bank Guarantee Indian Oil, which is the largest oil and gas producer in India, and AJAB, which is a bank in the Middle East, Arab Jordan Investment Bank, doing funds transfer across multiple subsidiaries, something they used to do through a normal SWIFT messaging, if you're familiar with the financial funds transfer systems, but decided that for their own subsidiaries they don't need to do that, they can go and do that through the blockchain. Nigeria Customs Service doing basically excise trade, as they call it, excise licensing and taxes. and a customer, Certified Origins down in Tuscany, that I had an opportunity to visit in June, which is one of the larger olive oil producers there. They work with around 1,500 local olive producing farms. And if you've read over the last year or two, there's been a lot of stories about all kinds of fabrications going on when it comes to authentic virgin olive oil from Italy. And they wanted to really make sure that they can prove that their olive oil is a real thing. And so using blockchain, and we'll talk a little bit about the process involved there and so on. But those are some of the public examples. I'll show you some details on these ones, and then a bunch of others where I cannot share the names, but equally interesting examples. We also have a bunch of partners doing, ISVs basically building things on our blockchain service. Neurasoft is out of Greece. They're doing invoice factoring. They sell invoice factoring systems to banks. TradeFin is a company, very interesting company. They have combined Hyperledger Fabric and Stellar Payment Network together to do essentially order to cash. So not only do they do all of the typical order fulfillment processing, purchasing, but actual payments happen on the Stellar network. SoftBank is a company that's building a purchasing-based blockchain solution where for companies who do a lot of purchasing and a lot of contracts in that space, they want to be able to translate sections of smart contracts into actual modules implementable on a blockchain, right? So there's all kinds of language. Sometimes I get people who come and talk about smart contracts from kind of a legal perspective, right? And I always feel a little lost and feel a little sorry for those people because I can't tell them how to take a legal contract and make it smart. I mean, you just can't take verbiage written for lawyers and make it executable in some way. But it turns out in purchasing, there are certain sections which are quantifiable. There are certain SLAs, there are certain rules, and you can translate those. So they're basically working on taking that and allowing people to say, okay, I'm going to map this into a certain executable module, if you will, in a smart contract. IntelliPost is a partner down in Brazil. They're one of the largest transportation management systems. Actually, is providing a SaaS for a lot of tracking. A lot of e-retailers in Brazil who send packages around the country use their services. There's multiple levels of tracking. There is federal, regional, local, etc., and a lot of handoffs of packages. And there is a fairly high degree of damage and pilferage happening. And so they want to use blockchain to eliminate that and ultimately reduce insurance costs and all of that. And Nexafort is another partner that's doing some interesting work around integration of ERP and banks in trade finance space. And just some examples. I mentioned this Arab Jordan Investment Bank, right? So they have subsidiaries in different countries. And today, when they want to send payments across, they typically use Swift messaging. And they send a message to Swift, and then it goes through a bunch of channels, correspondent banks, etc. And they don't have good way to see the current status. It takes time. They don't have visibility, and their customers want to see it right away. So they implemented a service based on our blockchain, integrated with their core banking system, where they can just in real time do the transfers. I mean, nothing fancy about it. I mean, nothing complicated. It's just basic use of blockchain. But it's it's a good example of how, from a financial messaging perspective, financial payments perspective, people are beginning to chip away at big providers like Swift, for example, and others. I mean, it's not going to go away in one day or 1 year, but people are going to find particular areas, niche areas, where they feel they can avoid using some of the intermediaries and use blockchain. Another example mentioned, India Oil Company. So they're huge. They do a lot of work, construction-related work, and all kinds of things, and they have a lot of vendors who bid on projects for them. And the requirement is that those vendors need to have a bank guarantee, so that if the project fails, the vendor fails to deliver, the bank will pay them, on the costs. Well, the vendor has to go to the bank and get the bank guarantee, issue the letter of guarantee. And that's a complex process. And they have to have a lot of details associated with the project itself, and those are in flux and change. And so often, by the time they go through this process, by the time that they actually get the bank guarantees, a hard copy from the bank at India Oil, they need to know, is this from a scheduled bank? Is it somebody they've already done business with? Or is this vendors that they already have in their system somewhere part of the project, right? Because it just comes in the mail, they don't know. Is it authentic? Is it valid? Does the project data correspond to the current state of the project? all of those things. And often it does not, and often you have to go back and redo it over and over again, which means that you have to have people working at it, they have to go through manual exception handling and all kinds of issues, right? So they decided to build a blockchain-based approach to this, where they essentially using a blockchain to interconnect themselves as a beneficiary, their vendors, and the banks they work with, so that all of the data can stay in one place, right? Single source of truth. So they put basically project folders on the blockchain, and then the vendors can use that information to apply to the bank for the guarantee. India Oil can see that process. When they ultimately get a digital bank guarantee issued from the bank back to them, they know that it's current because they can evaluate all of the project-related details in real time and check that it matches the data and that it's current. Also, now that it's in digital form, they can invoke it, they can amend it, they can do all kinds of things that they could not do before with paper. So this really helps them to reduce a lot of manual effort. One of the interesting things was that they had a number of participants, and those participants were all over the place. So some of them said, fine, we'll use Oracle Cloud Service to connect to the blockchain. Makes sense. But there were some that could not. In China, for example, there are all kinds of regulatory restrictions around banks using external clouds, right, outside of China. So in China, we actually needed to have a way to deploy locally, and we used our cloud machine, which is basically our cloud running in customer's data center on an appliance form factor. And then they had a bunch of people that wanted to use open source. And so speaking of the hybrid model, we were able to connect the open source fabric into this network as well. So they're all participating in the transaction models that I showed you earlier, exchanging data, and all of them can benefit from the same on the blockchain and the applications built on top of that. Here's another example. This is out of Korea. A bank that's building a cross-border loyalty network. So their thing was they have, it's typical credit card loyalty system. But they wanted to do something differentiating. There's strong competition in Korea. And what they said was that, look, a lot of our customers travel in Asia and around the world, and we want them to be able to spend those points abroad. We want them to be able to go on Alibaba site in China and buy from there without having to do foreign exchange, all of the currency costs and transaction costs, but just use points, right? So they build this network where they're going to have multiple participants. Some are banks, other banks, others are, all kinds of companies, travel and retail and whatnot, be able to exchange points in real time on this network. For the bank, it's a good way to get people to use the points because it takes debt of the balance sheet. But it's also helping them to attract the upwardly mobile part of the customer base to their bank, to their credit cards, people who travel, people who want to buy from abroad and so on. So it's a win-win. Another example for a loyalty system also out of Korea as it happens, something called M2O, Miles to Opportunity. So people have a lot of miles from various things, and sometimes it is enough to buy tickets and sometimes it's just nothing, right? Not enough to do anything with. And they want to translate that from transportation-based miles across the world into retail offers that people can use, and they basically are building a loyalty network, maintaining accounts, tracking points, etc., but essentially creating business value for the subscribers and for a variety of retail companies that are part of this network. How are we doing on time? All right. Here's a more interesting example where we have a distributor who is kind of sits in the middle of a lot of supply chains, right? So they work with a lot of OEMs and supply parts, and they buy those individual components from all over the world. They're a distributor, and there is this whole ecosystem of things coming and going. And what they want to do is create, using blockchain, a single inventory, single system, single ledger that maintains inventory between them and the suppliers. So that when they receive something in, when they ship it out, it's all reflected in the same record, or the same history of records, if you will, right? They're thinking about, the initial process was there is a lot of claims going back and forth from the time that they ship something, they get things in advance, they pay in advance, etc. So they wanted to have real-time visibility and settlement. They wanted to track chain of custody particular country of origin, since there are prohibited, restricted countries for various things and so on. They're thinking of actually a fee model where there is benefit, there is value to their ultimate customers, to OEMs, in being able to see this in real time. So they're thinking of charging for that as a fee, supply chain as a service kind of thing model. Here's another one. I mentioned earlier about parts in the manufacturing processes, right? So a fair amount of fraud, a fair amount of non-certified parts that are inferior in some respect. And so there is a project we're working on right now, actually, where they're trying to keep track of the parts requirements coming in from the OEMs, right? The handset OEMs, Samsungs and others, Apples, etc. Then they want to be able to have part suppliers maintaining track of all of the parts that they put in the supply chain. Often, they get devices which they break up for parts and reuse those parts, and they send them back to the remanufacturing suppliers, the companies that actually do the work, replacing screen on the phone, replacing batteries, replacing all kinds of things. And they get parts from these guys, and they put them in the phone. Well, the carrier and the OEM want to know those are legitimate, genuine parts. Even if they came in from another phone, that was broken up, they want to track, the IMEI number associated with the phone, with the part serial numbers, and ensure that it all matches the map provided by the OEM. So you have these multiple companies who need to be able to track all of this, right, based on the data that comes from the OEMs. And ultimately, the carrier here is on the hook to the customers, right? Because, if you have inferior parts on the phone, it may not last as long. There might be customer satisfaction issues. Warranty costs would be higher and so on, right? So they see a lot of benefit in being able to apply this on the blockchain. And here's the one I mentioned at the beginning, CargoSmart, maritime shipping documentation. So this is a really interesting process. There's a lot of companies involved as well, right? I mean, we just got, at this point, it's such an interconnected world that, if you ship something, like 5 different companies, maybe more, sometimes it need to be involved. There is a shipper, there is a freight forwarder who basically aggregates things, right? There is a carrier who actually runs the ships and containers and all of that stuff. And then there's also customs, and they're just simplified systems. There could be all kinds of other, truckers and, it's sort of like hub and spoke, right? Transportation systems. So there could be a lot more spokes. But ultimately, each shipment is around 20 plus documents associated with it, multiple versions, different sources. By the time it gets to customs, there's a bill of lading, master bill of lading. It has to be accurate, it has to be complete, it has to be on time. And often it's not, so they have to amend it. They end up missing the deadlines. Customs charges extra fees for expediting stuff. That's how they make money. And then people dispute this, who's responsible for those fees, who was sitting on the document too long and why it's got delayed. So a lot of mistrust in the system. So they're building basically on a blockchain. It's a consortium kind of effort where they're bringing the carriers and freight forwarders and shippers together to coordinate all of this using our blockchain service to create, first of all, ability to trace the documents, all of the records, metadata associated with who's done what to those documents when, so they can see exactly, how long it took. They have, of course, the audit trail and so on, and they can keep track of all of the information to ensure that it's as current as possible. Ultimately, the ships can pass inspection faster, and a container ship sitting in port costs a lot of money, right? The sooner you can get it out, the more money the carrier can make. As a freight forwarder, if you are packing a container and that container cannot leave port because of some issues with documentation and customs will not release it, the port will store it for you and charge a hefty fee for that on a daily basis, right? That's called the demurrage fees. So there is millions of dollars to be saved in doing this better on a blockchain. Okay, and this was my favorite customer down in Tuscany. So they wanted to, this is certified origins, if you go to the website, they have a map where they can show you exactly the provenance of where the oil came from, how long it took, where did it hit, and what, warehouse it was on, and all of that stuff. But they didn't have as much data here as they would like. So what we started with them is a project using blockchain that enables them to track the origin of the olives coming in from particular farms. I mentioned they have like 1,500 different farms feeding into their processing system. They have a couple different pressing plants they work with and so on, and then they ultimately do bottling. They do testing to ensure the grades and authenticity and all of that stuff, and they want that information on blockchain as well. So they can track production quality, and ultimately when it gets delivered, a customer can go on the site and they can track a lot more data, right? So this is going to be really interesting, and hopefully if you happen to be in San Francisco around October 22nd through 25th, Oracle Open World, which is our big conference, they'll be there talking about it. Here's another example. Here's a manufacturing customer, big conglomerate, multiple lines of business all over the world. And they have these divisions, X, Y, Z, and they do a lot of invoice factoring, right? Everybody knows what invoice factoring is? Should I explain it?
What factory?
Invoice factoring? Okay, so basically, they have a customer who's buying something from, Lab Z, let's say, and they have 60-day payment terms, and they don't want to wait 60 days, they want to get paid now. So they go to the bank and say, here's invoice, pay me 95% of the value, but now, and then you wait 60 days to collect the rest, whatever, right? Invoice factoring. Well, they do a lot of that, and they have predefined programs with some banks that they go through for, typical, regular kind of invoices, but then there's a whole bunch that don't fit into those programs. And so they have basically a marketplace, investor marketplace to sell those off to. And that marketplace essentially is a bunch of people sitting in a department with Rolodex cards, basically calling people they know, are going to be interested potentially, but it's very informal. So what they wanted to do was two things. They wanted to be able to streamline this process with the banks and exchange this information on blockchain and create a blockchain-based marketplace that's also going to be much more automated in a sense, right? And they'll be able to do multiple bids and attract and so on. So the first things they've done was, for the banks, created essentially an invoice map where they can track this between themselves and the banks. Then they added the marketplace component where the invoices can go on the marketplace, and then people can do bids and they can automate the bidding process. They're able to get ultimately faster settlement. If you think about in a large company with billions of dollars in invoices, being able to, at the end of the quarter, accelerate the process from 2 weeks to 2 days means that you can report the results and you can save millions of dollars in the process, right? And then for the investor marketplace, they also get more investors. It's easier to get smaller investors on and keep them there, and they can get better bids and better revenue. Solar site design, these guys are basically looking for plots to install solar systems on, and they need people to be able to do inspection and then site assessment and then design of the system and then installation and then operation. And there's a whole bunch of different, basically it's a gig economy kind of thing, and they need to track everybody, they need to pay them on time, they need to use some kind of a loyalty program to motivate them based on certain achievements and so on. So that's a system that they've built. So they go from the originator to a scout, developer, integrator, and so on. All of those are subcontractors pretty much. They track all of that in the system. Okay, this was Nigeria Customs. So they had this excise trade process, which was manual, big opportunity for fraud and mistakes and so on. And they often lost records. They had to go spend like months and months when a new company wanted to participate, import or export, getting the licenses issued, verifying all of the information and all of that stuff. So by putting it on a blockchain, they essentially have all of the benefits of faster settlement, immutable records, much harder to perpetrate some kind of fraud in that environment. And so in the process of finalizing this for deployment. Another government, you might have heard of a refugee crisis, particularly in Europe, one of the larger countries dealing with millions of cases, people coming across at different points, on the border as well as interior, right, and need to be tracked. And they have a whole infrastructure in place of federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs providing services. They need to know the status of the cases before they can determine which services somebody is eligible for. So at the federal level, there is agencies that are reporting the status information on the blockchain as it goes through. There is evaluation, there is adjudication, there is appeal processes, all kinds of things there, right? And as they report and update the case status information, all the local agencies, state, etc., NGOs able to track that information and then able to determine who's eligible for what services, and at some point maybe they're not eligible if they were before. Another one, this is up in Canada, digital identity. This is, I believe, Ontario, actually a province on the East Coast, where they wanted to provide essentially identity authority, and they have an RFP out, and we have a partner who's working on a blockchain with that, where they wanted to be able to essentially verify somebody's identity, proof it. And by proofing, we mean matching a person to some set of documents. It could be, passport ID of some sort, university ID. It could be driver's license, etc. Collecting that information on a blockchain, and what they do essentially is they generate a key pair, public-private key for a particular identity. So the public key represents that identity, and then it gets essentially signed. Let's see. It gets signed by the verification authorities on private key, right? So everybody can verify to the public is valid and put on a blockchain. Now that you have digital identity on a blockchain, whenever you go in to request some services from any other agency in that province, or you go to a bank to open an account, or you go to a hospital, they can ask you if you have a digital ID. And if you do and provide that number, then that organization can, through APIs, connect to the system and request information. Your mobile app will buzz and ask you if you agree to provide that information at that point in real time. And if you do, then that information will be released, and you don't have to bring piles and piles of documents with you. Right? So it's basically you have identity verification authority, and then you have identity using organization of some sort. Here's a slightly different, yes?
These are all really amazing use cases. I was just curious for you guys, are you mostly in the proof of concept phase of most of these organizations, or have you seen full-blown implementation?
Some are in full-blown implementations running in pilots. So when we were in a beta program, we could not do any production stuff. It just, legally wasn't an option. So now that we're generally available, people are finishing some of the pilot work, pre-production, and we expect at the end of October at Open World that some of them will announce full production. Yeah.
On some of these slides, like in the middle where the Hyperledger diagram is, if you just put an Oracle database in the middle, you can do a similar use case. Like you talk about the ownership or shared ownership.
So that's a good question, because you do see situations where sometimes people put magic happens here, right? It could be a database or for that matter anything else, right? The reason that people use blockchain is predominantly when they need to be able to share the data that comes from multiple organizations in a way that's trusted, right? People typically don't share data at a database level between organizations. If they do, that goes through the applications and some kind of reconciliation process, and generally not real time. And that's where blockchain brings significant value, where you can create shared ledger across multiple nodes, multiple participants. All the transactions coming in are digitally signed. There is consensus reached across smart contract execution to ensure that the update is valid, whatever form it takes, some business logic, and that it's serialized appropriately, right, before it actually hits the ledger. So that's the reason they're using that, because in all of those cases, they have multiple organizations involved. And today, in order for them to be able to do something like this with a database, there is no central database. There is everybody's siloed databases, and a very complex reconciliation process that takes sometimes hours, days, or weeks to be able to reconcile the data, often error-prone, with manual exception handling and all that.
Is there any mechanism in place to address a bad actor? Like, I understand it's a permissioned blockchain, but if somebody who is part of that blockchain actually behaves badly, is there a mechanism in place to identify?
Sure.
One, and two, has it happened on any of these projects?
So the mechanism is basically revoking of a certificate, right? I mean, everything is based on PKI certificates. And so we provide capabilities in our kind of operational console tools to revoke a certificate. And then everybody gets notified the certificate is invalid. And those transactions signed by that certificate no longer considered accepted.
I was thinking more in terms of identifying the bad actor, finding if somebody was.
Well, it depends what you mean by a bad actor, right? So if a client submits transaction and it goes to multiple peers, and you consistently have results based on whatever smart contract execution is not consistent, and one peer happens to be off, whether they have wrong starting data in the ledger or they are not running a valid smart contract but they're faking it in some way, right? Then you'd be able to see at the client application level. There is no kind of infrastructure mechanism necessarily to detect that, but there is, you can look through the logs, of course, and see that, you have asked for endorsement from certain number of peer nodes, and one of them has come back with something invalid, and it's consistently been the same particular organization.
Perhaps we
Yeah.
get into it later in the presentation, but I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the processes around bringing some of these companies together. So in some of these use cases, you've actually got a large organization has multiple subsidiaries, and so they have existing business relationships. But in
Right.
supply chain management, there's significant overhead for some of these companies to build their own individual applications, organize what data actually needs to be contributed. What's that look like?
Sure, yeah. That is a significant challenge in bringing people together. As you said, sometimes you have sort of a head of supply chain and all of the dependent parties. And they basically say, okay, we want you guys to join and do this, and we're going to set the rules. So it's like a founder-led blockchain where you have one organization that is in some way defining. Sorry, let me stop that. One organization that is, defining kind of the key rules. In other cases, you have actual and open, like in CargoSmart case, the transportation logistics, they are working with a whole bunch of ocean carriers to create an open, governable blockchain network. And we are bringing some capabilities, some technical capabilities around things like on-chain voting and governance models and so on, so that they could have people essentially voting on adding new members, creating new channels, or deploying a smart contract, or upgrading it to new versions, things of that sort.
How long is the product development lifecycle for some of these solutions?
We're pretty agile. I mean, the customer side of it that takes the longest is usually figuring the right use case and getting enough specificity around it, right, to create some kind of a minimally viable product MVP definition. That could take months. Once you get there from a definitional perspective, then the implementation is usually 2-3 months. We've seen them pretty quick.
And is it Oracle that's going in and providing those consulting services and enterprise blockchain expertise?
Yeah, in some cases. So we tend to provide more on a pre-sale side, and then we have a big partner network that does a lot of implementation work. Oracle has a consulting, post-sale consulting team, but they tend to be more about the infrastructure and deployment things. They participate in some projects. We have a solution engineering team on the pre-sale side that helps to create initial prototypes for customers as well. But a lot of it is partners, some of them global size, a lot of small partners, regional implementers and so on. So we work with a pretty broad ecosystem. Yeah.
One other question actually related to the supply chain space, kind of discussion around the Oracle problem, and I was just curious if you guys were implementing kind of standards around how you're trying to solve for that.
When you say the Oracle problem,
Sorry,
you mean yeah, smaller Oracle, yeah. So it's an interesting area. There is nothing currently in Hyperledger Fabric architecture that addresses that, and we believe there needs to be some capability, some solution. So actually looking actively at what it could look like. we're looking at some frameworks where it could be kind of a set of libraries that we provide, and then customer or the integrator builds the other half of it that's application specific, and then deploys it into as a trusted, essentially a trusted data source in the network, right, that you can query and get signed responses. So it's in research kind of design stages right now. Here's an example. This was actually written up. If you Google this organization, Niti Aayog, in India, they are basically a think hub of some sort. They're trying to innovate in variety of different industry areas. India has a really big problem with fake drugs, not only produced internally and consumed internally. World Health Organization estimates about 20%, but also 35% of all counterfeit drugs sold worldwide come out of India. And so they decided they really want to solve this problem. And the solution is basically to track this on a blockchain. So our consulting team in this case is working on implementing this with a lot of touch points, including some specialty hospitals. There is a hospital chain involved and a large pharmaceutical drug manufacturer company. And so we're going to build this, and then if they like the results, they'll start using it across the rest of the industry in India. But this is an interesting case because they're trying to integrate not just all those different touch points within the blockchain, but IoT data as well. So as you put something on a truck, there is an IoT device associated with shipment, with a pallet perhaps, and it's tracking geolocation, right? So you know exactly the route of the truck, and it didn't come out of a left side somewhere. And you also can track things like temperature and other things which are important for certain class of pharmaceuticals, like vaccines, for example. You have to be maintained at a certain temperature levels, otherwise they become ineffective and so on. So this is an interesting example here. A couple others just from a healthcare perspective, and then I'll get into some other stuff a little bit. This is a company. Okay, what's going on here? The company actually up in Boston, in Cambridge, that we're working with, who is building real-time patient monitoring solution, again, leveraging IoT devices and reporting data. So they basically have worked with some cardiovascular physicians who basically do, particularly when people have like a cardio and heart attacks and they get discharged, they need to be monitored carefully. So those people basically issued a scale and a device that monitors the heart rate. It reports the data through the IoT cloud into a blockchain environment, and then it's available to physicians and nurses and care providers, and there is typically a multidisciplinary team across different organizations involved. Again, somebody asks, why not just put it in a database? Well, who would run the database? Because you have 3 or 4 different organizations and companies involved in this process. They all need to be able to see the same data at the same time, and there's no way to do that with the database technology easily. So they're going to be at Open World as well, talking about this. The idea is to be able to use smart contracts to quickly generate alerts. If some events happen, that's very easy to program, heart rate above certain levels, weight gain, those kind of things, right? And they have actually a hospital system down in Austin, I believe, that's going to be doing a pilot with this. This is slightly different, still medical, but health insurance, where you have essentially, and this is in Asia, where you have people who have ability to submit claims to multiple companies for the same claim. So what they want to do is essentially to create a blockchain channel to combat fraud, to be able to see the same claim has been submitted to multiple companies. So you have MTL, this is in Thailand, and one of the other big insurance companies there, so that they go through this process when the claim is submitted, some information, not detailed patient stuff, etc., but some identifying information about the claim is put on a blockchain channel, and then they can check if that same claim has been submitted by anybody else. And there is audits and all kinds of things they can do around that. So, and just a bunch of other ones. What I wanted to do is spend a few minutes talking about some of the requirements and some of the things we've learned through this process, right? So a lot of the things were started, I would say, around last October. So it's been a little bit less than a year going through a number of these, and we have learned a lot of things that made our cloud solution stronger and more capable to address some of those requirements. What we see people need from an enterprise perspective are generally two sets of capabilities. On one hand, if they're experimenting, they need to be able to do it quickly. They want to be able to fail fast if a use case doesn't make sense, but they don't want to spend months and months building out infrastructure and doing all of the heavy lifting necessary to just find out if it's going to work or not. So they want quick, rapid provisioning, get in and out in a matter of minutes, spend maybe a couple of weeks or months trying a use case and then seeing if it works. On the other hand, if it does work, they want to go production. We have many customers we spoke with who said, we talked to our enterprise architects and said, we've been experimenting for a while, and now, my management and the board says, enough experimenting, we want to see some value, get something working in production. 2018 is a year when people really want to see stuff in production, and you need all of the things around scalability and high availability, resilience, security. You're sharing confidential data, you need all of that protection in. You need to be able to integrate with a bunch of surrounding systems. Right? Blockchain by itself is of no value if you don't have any data. The data comes from systems of records. Transactions come from systems of records. So all of that enterprise integration with the back office systems is important. And you cannot afford to do it one-off. So you really need an infrastructure to do that plug and play. Right? And management, operations, governance, all of those things. So we have essentially tried to, what are we doing here? Create a solution that responds to those requirements. On one hand, it's a pre-assembled, managed platform as a service, PaaS level offering. So basically everything is pulled together in a single environment, single template, pre-provisioned. So it's very quickly, you can very quickly sign up and start using it. It takes a few keystrokes, a few input fields. We don't ask you to build things from scratch. Everything you need is there. And you can start in the morning and be ready to actually start deploying chain code in the afternoon. And then we also focused on the enterprise back office application and a way of extending and integrating them into this environment, creating APIs and adapters that make it much easier and faster. And then we're also working on some applications at a kind of SaaS level as well that will hide the blockchain, that will embed it in a sense, so customers don't even have to think about integration, they just use the application itself.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Will your deck be available after
Yeah.
the show? So there'll be a
I'll send PDF to Richard and he can distribute it, yeah.
Who's next? That's all that you answered about.
Hey, Mark, about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, good.
Are you doing any easy integration between blockchain and your new Oracle Fusion Cloud?
Yes, let me get to that in one slide actually, if I can. So one of the things that we try to do, as I mentioned, is to make it easy and quick to consume, right? So if you start with Hyperledger Fabric, you're going to get a set of capabilities that I described earlier, the peer nodes, you're going to get the membership service, you're going to get the client SDK, etc. But there is a whole bunch of things that you need to bring into this to make this work in an enterprise environment. Around identity management behind the certificate issuance process, Event Hub for ordering, managing the container lifecycle, managing the recovery when something fails, scalability, managing patching and upgrading lifecycle of the system, all of that. So we kind of took care of all of those things by providing all of those as built-in capabilities in our service, which is essentially taking Fabric and creating an industrialized production-ready version. So it's all pulled together with all of the other dependencies in what we call an autonomous PaaS. And it has a bunch of integration capabilities built in with variety of Fusion Cloud, or what we call the Oracle SaaS Cloud now, as well as third-party stuff. So we have Oracle Integration Cloud service, which has like 50 plus adapters for Oracle and non-Oracle things in the cloud and on premises. And those adapters essentially allow you to capture application level events and then map them into blockchain REST API calls. And our connectivity into the blockchain is either through the REST APIs that we provide or through the client SDK. And as I mentioned earlier, we do integrate with non-Oracle Fabric peers as well to make it easier.
There were a bunch of hands on that.
Yeah. Go ahead. No?
Mine
Okay.
will wait till the end because he may answer it, and I don't need to waste time.
All right. Well, yeah, just a couple. So from an integration perspective, right, I just wanted to highlight a few things. REST API integration is going to be very important. We find that a lot of developers in an enterprise environment really don't feel comfortable doing async programming that's involved in using the SDK. If you look at Fabric SDK, you have about 4 or 5 steps you need to do for a single transaction commit. There's a bunch of async stuff, and they're just not a comfort zone for most developers. So REST API that provides synchronous invocation of transactions and access to the data, queries, etc., is going to make it much easier and open up the ability of developers in the companies to integrate. We also provide async APIs in there for people who want to be able to register for event notification and other things through that as well. So you could do both synchronous and asynchronous. We're also going to be providing stuff in italics, by the way, is the roadmap stuff that's not there today, but it's coming. Configuration and operations REST API, so adding new peers, creating new channels, those kind of capabilities, getting the dashboard metrics, etc. You could do through REST APIs as well. Of course, the standard Fabric SDK, so you can get those from Fabric, or you can get it from our console as well and download, and they do all of the standard Fabric stuff. The integration cloud that I touched on provides a bunch of integration points for all sorts of applications, ERP and SEM, Oracle and others, but also technology adapters. So if you want to, for example, take a file and do an FTP and then process the records and put them on a blockchain, you could use an adapter to do that, for example, to map that, or GMS messages and other things. And then, we built inside a lot of things that customers needed as we went through this process with them over the last, 10 months or so. On the performance side, one of the things we've done that's really interesting is that we replace the databases used in Fabric. Fabric's got 2, LevelDB and CouchDB. CouchDB is used for rich data queries, but use is a strong word. You could play with it, but it's not really usable. They both have pretty poor performance. They require file level locking, which means you cannot get any concurrent updates. With CouchDB, you have a very non-standard query language that you have to use if you want to do rich queries. And you also don't have the capability, when you process a transaction, to actually confirm the results of the query at the time you're committing a transaction. It's one of the limitations there. So we replace it with BerkeleyDB, which is a key value store that Oracle has that provides record level locking, so we can get much higher concurrency. We've seen about 5 to 10x improvement in ability to speed up the transactions. And we also added for developers SQL-based interfaces for each query, so you no longer have to code a lot of complex stuff to do rich data queries. We're basically querying by attributes. You can now use simple SQL calls, and that speeds things up a lot for developers. A lot of operational resilience I talked about. You can use backup, DR, etc. On security side, certificate revocation management, data encryption at rest. We're adding fine-grained access control, which is badly needed because if companies exchanging confidential data, you cannot do that without access control. On supportability side, the console provides very dynamic capabilities to change configuration without restarting the system. Zero downtime, manage patching. So patching and upgrade does not require taking system down because it's all running in HA kind of environments, containers, so you could do rolling upgrades essentially, but we cover all of that. We're working on governance capabilities, so you can do consortia kind of networks where you're going to have people taking decisions through voting processes and others. And then on the development side, a bunch of things that I touched on already. We're adding analytics support is going to be really important. Every single customer I talk to says I have this real great hope for a lot of valuable data on a blockchain, but now I need to be able to plug in some analytics and extract it and do dashboards. So we're adding that support as well, and that's coming. So I just wanted to skip to the last slide. I'll just summarize all of this value add from Oracle, but don't want to bore you with that. What I wanted to get to is this slide, which talks about where to go for more information if you're interested. We have 3 sites. The first one is a general Oracle kind of blockchain site. Got news and articles and analyst reports and things. The second one is where our service, our cloud service is, if you want to try it, if you want to get documentation, cloud.oracle.com/blockchain. And the last one, developer.oracle.com/blockchain, is basically for developers where you have a lot of videos and tutorials and things like that. Now, anybody in startups here? We have a global, what we call scale-up startup ecosystem, where we help promising startups to work with our customers, leverage. You get some free cloud credits, not 500. I mean, it's a lot more than $500 and so on. So there's a URL. If you go to oracle.com/blockchain, there is a link there as well for startups. So you can take a look at that, and you get to work with my team to get some guidance and some help in using Fabric and so on.
Is that a virtual engagement, or is that something that has to be physically?
There is both modes available. So the ones where you have to be physically there, I think there is a few points around the world, 5 or 6. Those a little bit more restricted, obviously, right? But there is a virtual one as well. And then as far as the cloud, if you want to try it, you can go to this URL, or you could go again to cloud.org/blockchain. There's a right button there. And generally, we have like a $300 free credit for 30 days. But for folks attending here who will send their emails, you can get up to 500 credit. We'll just send you a link and so on. The marketing folks were very kind to provide that. So I'll stop and take any other questions.
Oracle, through many acquisitions, has a lot of products and services in the construction management,
Yes.
procurement space. And that is a huge industry, $1 trillion industry all by itself. But I never saw the word construction in any of this. Is that because you're just not wrapping your head around it, you're not doing it yet, or that's somebody else's job? I'm just curious. Where is
No, I only have an hour and a half. I mean, if you could say for another half an hour, I can talk about construction. We do have what we call general business unit, GBUs, which are vertically focused, and there is one called construction and engineering. And I had a chance to spend some time with those folks, and there is a lot of interest in construction. And there are interesting use cases there that we are working on, actually. So didn't mean to ignore that industry. I think there is a lot of potential there. May not be as big as supply chain, but it is viable, and I'll stick around a little bit if you want. We can talk more about that.
So one of the criticisms that a lot of blockchain skeptics, especially enterprise blockchain skeptics, tend to point to, and I think it obviously is more of just an indicator of the how early we are in this technology space, right? But they point to the fact that there aren't any really good examples of effective applications of blockchain within enterprise sorts of applications. Can you talk to why that is? When do you expect to see things that people will readily agree, okay, this really makes sense, there's money to be made here?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you saw the earlier part of this, but I just went through a number of those examples where people are...
Those are in beta, correct?
Those are in pilot form, and some of them in the next couple of months, by end of October, we'll see some live announcements. Perfect. People going public. So as to why, I mean, I agree with you. There's been a lot of experimentation. And what you find is that the technology has not been very mature. Things that I've talked about as Oracle Value Add wasn't there a year ago. And people had to spend a lot of time. You would find a use case that makes sense, that works, and you go to your enterprise IT, and they give you a checklist which will take you 6 months or a year to build out around that infrastructure. Well, now we're basically packaging all of that and making it available. So I firmly believe this year we're going to see real production deployment, certainly Oracle, and not only Oracle. I mean, there are other companies that are doing them. And we're going to see, and I think, rapid acceleration next year as well. This year we might see a few dozen in different industries. Next year, maybe a few hundred. Yes.
In the beginning, you said that you can use IBM Lumens with Oracle blockchain. Can you elaborate on that?
So we work from a protocol perspective. We are very interoperable with Hyperledger Fabric at the protocol level, right? So you could take an instance of Hyperledger Fabric and connect it in, exchange certificates, etc., into networks that's using the Oracle blockchain version. And if you have one running in IBM Bluemix, and they allow you to do that, that's great. But you need to obviously check, that they would allow you to do that. We have people who have found, for example, that IBM Bluemix Cloud, where you install your open source, probably easier. The IBM Bluemix blockchain service, which is mainframe bound, they might see that a little challenging, right? Connecting to a mainframe.
So there's no use case where people actually use IBM Bluemix with Oracle Cloud?
We have people who are currently working on that with Hyperledger Fabric in IBM Bluemix Cloud, but not the IBM PaaS level service, but more on infrastructure. I understand right now IBM even won't allow you to connect between the two of IBM's data centers. So once they start that, then hopefully they'll make it easier for external connections as well.
Will Oracle be open sourcing all of these cool tools or any part of it, or the rest of the guy or anything for us?
We are going to be contributing some components, not everything, but there's going to be some areas where I think there's going to be both joint kind of, architecture work, and we're participating in a lot of architecture groups and contributing some of the components as well. I believe, things like governance, for example, is not going to work if just Oracle solves it. It needs to be Hyperledger Fabric wide. Some of the fine-grained access control capabilities, some of the stuff that's going on around database technology and making the databases more performant or key value stores from an API level, etc. So some of the identity management stuff. We have to go through kind of a legal process. We just got GAs. It wouldn't allow us to do anything until our own product is out first. Now that we are in a position to start contributing more.